So I've just finished, finally got around to it, ShIn Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. And I wanted to talk about it just off the cuff, my thoughts on the story and the game. Because I have some thoughts. To establish my background, really enjoy the SMT series. I've played Nocturne, 4, Apocalypse, the original 5, started Strange Journey, didn't finish it. Nothing against it, I just haven't gotten around to it. And obviously I enjoy the Persona series as well. All the ones that are on modern consoles, Atlas, whenever you get around to porting Persona and ShIn Megami Tensei's 1 and 2, that would be great. I'm sure we'd all appreciate it. So I bought SMT5 when it came out on Switch day one, and I enjoyed it a lot in the beginning. I was very optimistic, but by the time I reached the end, and especially after I finished it, I really soured on that game. And in the time between finishing it and the release of Vengeance, I really hated SMT5 base game because, frankly, the game wasn't fucking finished. There was no story to speak of. The characters were completely underdeveloped, not given the time that they needed to be either interesting characters in the way that Apocalypse had their characters, or even be good alignment representatives in the way that um, Nocturne and 4 did it. They just were really shitty, and they didn't get any of the attention that they deserved. And very clearly, a lot of stuff was rushed and not fully fleshed out. And I think playing through Vengeance makes that all the more clear, because suddenly all the pieces that didn't make sense and didn't go anywhere and didn't seem to have any rhyme or reason in the original game now have been recontextualized in Vengeance. And this is either clearly the intended vision they had to begin with, or a much better reorganized vision of the ideas they had in the beginning. But either way, SMT5 was not the finished product we should have gotten. It was just not good. It was not ready. And I think that is my core criticism with Vengeance too, because unfortunately, normally Atlas re-releases are, hey, here's Persona 4, and now here's Persona 4 Golden. There's no choice. It's just Golden now. And that Golden content might be optional, but the game itself has changed. You can't go back and take Marie out of the game. That's not a choice that you have. Same thing with Nocturne. Now recently they did re-release it so you can play the original release, but I don't think that's how it was originally on PS2. And 4 never got those re-releases. But here they took the different approach, and they said, well, we're going to keep and preserve the original story, and we're going to call that the canon of creation, and now we're going to introduce the new story, and we're going to call that the canon of vengeance. And the problem with that is that I think Atlas, either because creatively they truly did believe this, or financially it was just easier and more beneficial to do it this way, Atlas treated the two routes as equal and opposite. And so there's content and there's stuff that is not in Vengeance, basically exclusively so that it can remain in Creation and that route has purpose. The problem is that Creation is still trash, as far as I know. No one's ever talked about anything that's changed in Creation. I haven't played through Creation again yet, and frankly, I don't intend to for a while. My next run is going to be Vengeance again to get the other ending, which I'll talk about. But I think that was the biggest mistake, because there's a bunch of stuff that happens in Vengeance, or stuff that does not happen in Vengeance, I think exclusively because of that. And so ultimately, Vengeance is also an incomplete product. It's a much better product, and it is a finished product, but creatively, I think it's an incomplete product. Not everything is there, and I'll get into some of the more specifics later, but I wish that they hadn't done that. I wish they had scrapped Creation, thrown it out, kept some of the good ideas, sure, but just completely redone the game and have everything in Vengeance. So what's missing from Vengeance? Some gameplay areas are missing, which also happens to overlap with an important story section, but there is also some story missing separately from that. Some character moments and some enemies and fights that happen in Creation, which I've been speaking generally so far, but I am going to go into spoilers now. So if you haven't actually played Vengeance yourself or SMT5 at all, this is where you would want to check out. I'm going to go into spoilers here. So, for instance, um, in Vengeance, there's a new area. I forget what it's called. I think it's Shinjuku actually. That replaces the original third area of SMT5, where you fought the Demon King and his army, and where um, Ichiro Dazai had a lot of his character development that helped you understand a little bit why he moved toward being a light representative, and how his perspective changed, and how he developed a relationship with the Archangel Abdiel. All of that is gone in Vengeance. It still happens. It's acknowledged that it is happening, and Dazai is there, and Abdiel is there, and they are fighting the Demon King, but you don't go there. You don't see any of it because you're fucking around in Shinjuku. And the problem is that I don't think anything replaces that in terms of the story development. Like, all of that's just gone. And so, again, like, if you want to experience that content, you have to then play Canon of Creation, which I don't think is very good. So I would have preferred if that content and that story were here in Vengeance. So we could have maybe understood more about Dazai, because here, people said in the original 5 that Dazai's change to being like law and evil um, was kind of out of nowhere. And it was, but I think there was Dazai and Abdiel had the most attention on them, right? They had the most service to them as characters in the original release. But here, I feel like both of them kind of got sidelined a little bit, actually, because now Mastima's here, and he's like the highest angel on site now. And so Abdiel kind of gets relegated to a boss fight. She has very little story significance anymore, and you don't really get to see her interact with Dazai too much, because that a lot of that stuff is missing. Um, and so something I don't think you ever even find out in Canon of Vengeance is that Dazai is Abdiel's knowledge. I don't think you ever actually find that out in Vengeance. I don't think it comes up. You would know that if you played Creation, but I don't think it actually comes up in Vengeance. And here, it seems like, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Mastema probably got inside Dazai's head, intentionally or otherwise, and that helped push him over the edge, and he snaps. But the thing is, he snaps even harder than he did originally, because when he snaps, he kills Yuzuru Atsuta. And I have a huge problem with this. Not only because it's a huge betrayal for Dazai. I mean, Dazai had been a pretty cool character. Like, you had come to like Dazai and Atsuta a little bit up to this point. So he goes 0 to 100 in a single scene. It's absolutely wild. And Atsuta had been done dirty in Creation, in the original release, because he was supposed to be our Chaos rep, and he was already a part of Bethel. He knew Tsukuyomi. He was Tsukuyomi's knowledge, but he had gotten so little time on screen to develop anything about him that you barely even knew who the fuck the guy was or what he wanted. Here he gets a lot more attention leading up to this, but then ultimately it doesn't go anywhere. He dies. Dazai kills him, and that's the end of his story. Nothing else comes of it. And his sister, Miyazu, also remains relegated to a background character as a side quest. You still have to go and do Kansu's side quest to see more of her after the fact. And I don't get this. These characters had already been done dirty in Creation, and it's like the writers decided like they just didn't like these characters, so they had to get rid of them, right? And it doesn't even make sense, because Tsukuyomi and Asuta had gone to Shinjuku to become a Nahabino and join the fight. So why didn't they? Why is it that after Tiamat fucking shows up, blows everything half to hell, Dazai shows up, is clearly evil, and is about to do some wild shit, they still don't turn into a Nahabino? They just remain separate, and Yuzuru gets murdered, like, super easily. Like, what the hell was that about? Why did you guys not actually fuse? And I think the answer is ultimately that A, they wanted to save the other Nahabino forms for Canon of Creation, because you also never fight Abdiel and Dazai's Nahabino form. And I think they needed to justify why we had a new design for this game, which I don't like. I mean, I like the design, but if the only way to achieve that was to kill Atsuta so that we could have Tsukuyomi for a period of time, and I'll talk about that. Um, I'm not down with that at all. That was when I checked out of the story for a while, and that's part of what took me so long to finish, was because I thought that that was so dumb and stupid. Um, I was really dissatisfied with that, and it almost became worse when at the end Aogami comes back, and like as a cool moment, and it's a cool moment. It's like, wow, shit, Aogami's back. That's awesome, and it makes sense why he's back. Um, and then Tsukuyomi does die. And so he and Atsuta both just get fucked over in this story, and I don't really understand why. Like, what did the writers have against him? Because even though Dazai's importance did get reduced a little bit, I think that's kind of acceptable because of how important he was in the original release. What I thought that they were going for at the beginning was actually, because Tao and Yoko both join you very early on, I thought what they were setting up was a situation where you had two reps on each side, you know, a male and a female law and chaos rep, and maybe depending on your choices, any combination of them would be loyal to you, and the others would become your enemies based on those factors. But that's not what happened. This is the Yoko and the Tao show, and both Dazai and Atsuta got sidelined, but the problem with Atsuta is he was already sidelined in the original, so he's been double disrespected now, and I just don't understand why. I don't know what they had against this guy. I was really hoping he'd have something better here, something more, and I think he got shafted really hard, and that was unfortunate. Um, and that's kind of my biggest complaint with the story, to be honest. I enjoyed the rest of it quite a bit. In the original release, the story stopped mattering basically after the Namu stuff, and even that was not great. Um, but here, the story remained consistent. There was a plot to follow. Even though I didn't agree with all of it, it made sense, and I was invested in Yoko and Tao. This is the Yoko and Tao show, and I did like Yoko and Tao. Because when I got to the final boss last night, and they're sitting there on both sides of me making their case for destroy the world, recreate the world, you know, establish a new order, whatever. I was torn, and I had been torn the whole game, as is usual. I lean more toward neutral, and I, depending on the game and how genocide either side is, I lean a little bit toward or away from either side. But I'm very much in the middle, and I did make a combination of law and chaos choices in this game. Because I just, depending on whatever I thought was correct in the moment, I don't think that one answer is always correct. And so I interestingly found myself in the situation, as I found out today, where I could actually go either way based simply on how I responded to Yoko showing up in that moment. I had enough points. I was either perfectly in the middle or I had enough points on either side, however it works, that I could choose my ending in that moment based on how I greeted Yoko. Because last night, I was saying, "Hey, I'm happy to see you," because I like Yoko, and so then when I was conflicted and I genuinely didn't know what I was going to pick, and I thought I was going to sit there forever, my character made the choice for me, and he chose Yoko. I was super thrilled about it because I didn't have to make the choice, and my choices mattered. Unlike the original, where your choices didn't matter at all, because you could just choose what you wanted at the end, regardless of what you'd done up until then. I thought that was great. I thought the scene was great where they make their cases. It's well presented, it's super well paced, and just everything about it is great. And having the choice made for you in that moment based on your previous decisions, that's how it should be. Um, and last night I got Yoko. I did die to the final boss because Annihilation Ray hit me. I'm pretty sure that it seems to just wipe out your party. I had max buffs. She was debuffed. I had Kanabi Veil up. She still wiped out my party, even though my party was level 90. I survived, and I tried to get the cinematic solo finish, but that's not how that fight worked, so it didn't work out. I came back to it today. I made the other choice. I sided with Tao, and so today I got the law ending. And I thought that the Tiamat fight was good. The other two fights I did not think were very good. I mean, Lucifer was always disappointing in the original. I never fought, quote-unquote, true ending Lucifer. But this version of Lucifer was trash. I don't even know why he's here really as a fight. It's super pointless. But the other creature that you fight. I can't remember its name at the moment, but that was kind of a tedious battle. Not hard. Nothing was hard. I had an electric build, electric magic build, spec to pierce everything. So it's not that it was hard. It just took a little bit. I enjoyed the Tiamat fight way more. I thought the other two fights were kind of pointless. I do object though with the chaos ending to the idea that Mastema can just show up and take control of Tiamat from Yoko. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. That seems really forced. Like they didn't want to come up with new boss fights, and I suspect that second boss fight is also the same. So I think no matter what you choose, you're gonna have the same bosses, which is really shitty. Like that's not how it should be. You should fight different enemies. Like Mastema should show up and fucking summon something god related. Like I don't know, or we just fight fucking Mastema himself. Having him just show up and take control of Tiamat seems really shitty. But I think again they did that to facilitate getting Aogami back so that you can end the game in your original form, which I mean I did not expect. It was a pleasant surprise. I don't know if I needed it. I don't know if I even really agree with that much because again it's throwing Tsukuyomi under the bus too for no reason. But I thought that like that scene was really good and the law ending was presented well. Like it seems like a good ending, and you fight Lucifer, so based on that, the mandala system's done. So this is kind of the best happy ending you're ever gonna get in the series. I am interested to do the chaos ending again. I don't know if I'm gonna go back and just refight those bosses. I don't think I can put myself through those bosses again. They're kind of tedious. But I do want to pre-play and get the chaos ending on New Game Plus, and then maybe revisit creation afterwards if I still am interested in the game. But I really just wish that they had put everything into Vengeance rather than isolating some stuff out into creation. You know, it would have been really cool. You do fight Dazai and Abdiel side by side, and that's cool. But like, why couldn't we get that with Atsuta, right? I just don't know why the story couldn't have been written in such a way whereas you got to fight either of them, you know, like. And I think the law preference that SMT5 seems to have had the whole time in the original release and in this one, where the fact that you're working for Bethel the whole time, Abdiel's basically on your side most of the time, and that Tao joins you in the final area, but Yoko doesn't show up until the last minute. All of these things I feel are very law biased. But like in an ideal world, what I would have liked to see is I would have preferred if one, we didn't have to kill Atsuta. That whole thing seemed unnecessary. Don't do that. Don't give us a reason to go against Yoko. Let us decide in that moment when Tiamat gets summoned, like who are we gonna side with? Are we gonna go Chaos or gonna Law then? Maybe it's not a full commitment at that point, but let us make some decision, have everyone live, and then based on that decision, our party members in the next section change. Like we could have Yoko with us, and we'd fight Tao and Dazai, right? Or the vice versa. That would have been way better. And like, if you still want to kill Atsuta, you can do it. But for God's sake, let the man do something first. Let him get a win. Right? This man needs a win. Let him turn into a Nahobino. How sick would it be to have another Nahobino in your party, or at least fight alongside you in some way? Or maybe at the end it is a little bit tragic and like, okay, we did this, we won, we beat all of the law, but look, there can only be one of us. So then you need to have a duel with Atsuta, and maybe you have slightly different beliefs. That would be cool, right? And then you could do the same thing with Dazai. But I think you should have had their Nahobino forms in the canon of Vengeance. I think it's a missed opportunity. Same with taking out the demon castle. I mean, the game is already long. It did take me 50 hours to finish it. So it's not that the game is lacking in content, but it just feels cheap that they took out an area, put a new one in, and said, hey, there's new content. Well, not really. You just replaced an area. That feels cheap. Why couldn't you just have everything here? I don't really understand why they did it that way. And I think these things are going to hold this game back from being one of my favorites. I think it is good. I think it's quite good, and I do appreciate a lot of the gameplay changes they made. Like, reducing the level scaling was huge. And as far as I can tell, no matter what you do in Canon of Vengeance, you're always going to get the skill that lets you bypass skill inheritance limitations. Because in the base game, you know, if a demon has 4 skills, you can't like remove those skills like you could in 4, and so you're always limited on fusion options, which is always just kind of a pain in the ass. But if you do Canon of Vengeance, no matter what you pick, you get that skill. Whereas in Canon of Creation, not only do you have to pick the Chaos route, you have to actually match that alignment the whole time, do the side quest relevant, so that you can get that skill in the end. If you get the ending, but you didn't side with Chaos the whole time, you were somewhere in the middle, doesn't matter, you don't get the skill, go fuck yourself. So I really appreciate that, and I would recommend anyone start with Vengeance almost exclusively for that, because it's going to make all of your future fusions way better. Because you are no longer limited by this, and you don't have as much reliance on essences to make an ideal demon. Um, I thought overall the gameplay was just really solid. I mean, unfortunately, it still didn't really change Amagitoki Critical. It's still here. Um, it does eventually get replaced by the new skill you get, like Omnipotent Succession, which if your Nahobino is a damage dealer, which he almost certainly will be, it's a wildly powerful skill. I literally hit the final, like that one, the second final boss. I hit her for like upwards of 10,000 damage in a single turn. I think I was hitting her for 6,000 damage every time I hit her, and then I hit her 4 times in a row. It's a huge amount of damage. It's wild, and that's kind of how I burst down Shiva as well, with that skill. And I'm sure it can be made even more powerful if you do, more wild strats than I do pretty safe stuff. So overall, I really enjoyed the gameplay, the changes that they made, the fact that it's not locked on the Switch at 30 FPS, 720p, terrible performance. All of these are pluses and bonuses. Some of the new music was really good. The Kadishtu theme is really good. Speaking of the Kadishtu, I did enjoy the Kadishtu. I think they suffered a little bit from the plot and the pacing too, and that they do kind of disappear, and they get replaced entirely by Yoko. And I don't really agree with that. I feel like they spent time building up the Kadishtu as characters, and you don't even really get that much time with Lilith at all. Like she does nothing basically. I think the Kadishtu probably should have stuck around, and maybe you have a final set of duels with them in the end. Because it just feels pointless to introduce them and then waste them as characters after the second act. I appreciate that Satan and his design from Apocalypse has returned. I really like that design. I'm excited to fight that super boss. I'm interested in fighting Demi-Fiend. I never beat him in the original because I just could not be bothered on the fucking Switch to play that game any more than I had to. I really appreciate having all the DLC built in, or at least all the original DLC. Speaking of, these DLC demons are ridiculous. I was using Amaterasu. I was using Cleopatra. I was not Amaterasu, but Sakuya, Konohana Sakuya. I was using Cleopatra. Idun's always top tier, right? Like all the waifus, right? All the healing, buffing waifus. Really powerful demons. Overall, I really did enjoy the game. I think still some of the side quests got a little tedious. Some of the open world exploration at the end got a little bit tedious. But it's all optional, so you don't have to do any of it. And I think it's decently well rewarded. So overall, I mean, I did enjoy the game. And I'm not as sour about some of these complaints as I was originally. I do wish that it was different, because if it was, this really could be a 10 out of 10 game if they had really reworked it so that creation and vengeance were just a single route and there were multiple endings instead of just 2. If you had degrees of endings, like you could maybe you sided with 2 different law reps, right? Maybe Dazai and Tao have different interpretations of law, which they very clearly do, by the way. They very clearly do. And Yoko and Atsuta clearly have very different definitions of chaos. And I do want to point out for anyone still listening that I've heard that supposedly the endings of SMT5 were never law, chaos, and neutral. They were variations of law. Sure, I get that. But for the sake of just consistency in the series, I'm going to refer to them as law, chaos, and neutral. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. And obviously here there are actual chaos options this time, or there is at least one. But I think if there were at least 4 endings, like, hey, you can side with Dazai, you can side with Yoko, you can side with, any of these characters, and then you still had the neutral endings with Nua and Yakumo, who, by the way, also got shafted in this because they do nothing in the end, ultimately. I mean, you have some fights with them. I don't even think you ever fight true Nua. That's another thing that gets locked behind, that canon of creation. Both of them kind of get shafted. I would have just appreciated if they had just turned it into a single route and you had 6 choices, right? You either side with your friends one way or the other, or maybe Yakumo convinces you to take a neutral path somehow. That would have been ideal. And if they had done that, this would probably be a 10 out of 10 or very close to it. I generally don't agree with things being a 10 out of 10, but I'd be willing to give it a 9, despite some other flaws that I do think that it has that are not necessarily worth mentioning at this point. Minor gameplay stuff. But the creative or financial decision to maintain creation and pretend that it is an equal and opposite route to vengeance, I disagree with. And for me, that's a permanent black mark that takes the game down. And I think ultimately, like, it's a 7, it's a 7 out of 10. Maybe an 8 if I was being really generous and I really liked the gameplay specifically, if I didn't care so much about the story. But I still ultimately think, in terms of story, 4 still beats the shit out of this game. Because 4 doesn't really drop the ball with the story. Other than the very end where both sides are genocide. Other than that, the story of 4 is super solid. And it has characters that are developed and have full arcs, and it's really good. And I like Apocalypse because I do enjoy the characters. I think they are well written. I think they are likable. And the only complaint I have with Apocalypse is the kill your friends ending doesn't really make any sense. But other than that, which is the stupid ending no one would ever pick anyway, other than that, Vengeance is really good from both a gameplay and a story perspective. I think Vengeance has great gameplay now, so I would be willing to put Vengeance above Nocturne because clearly Vengeance just has better gameplay than Nocturne. I was not willing to say that about base SMT5, but Vengeance clearly has better gameplay than Nocturne. Whether or not it has better characters in a story, that one's a little bit more up for debate. I think I'm willing to give that point also to Vengeance, if I'm willing to excuse the fact that, like, Dazai and Atsuta just got thrown to the wolves for no reason. Because if the story's about Tao and Yoko, I did care about them and I was conflicted between those two. But if we're talking about the guys, half the cast, and we throw them out the window, it's not as good. So depending on what perspective you're tackling this from. So overall, decent game. I have some complaints. Wish it was different. Could be better. Good game. Could be better. But honestly, at this point, Atlas, just port 4 in Apocalypse, and then get working on those fucking remakes, of Persona 1 and 2 and SMT 1 and 2. We'd all appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thanks for listening. I'm hoping to make some more videos on things I have controversial thoughts on soon.